Hey, Tony DeWitt here, Missouri Appellate Attorney. I'm retired, and this is not legal advice. Everything I say is simply commenting on the law, and this will be what we're commenting on today. I want to take a moment and talk about something that I think is important and that I think often gets overlooked or not very well discussed in the conservative and even in the liberal media. And that is the job of prosecutor and the what I would call the associated complications that come with that job. So, when you are a prosecutor, your job is not to get convictions. Your job is to do justice, which is why, in some cases, it's necessary for you to file motions to dismiss, even on things that have already been indicted. And the reason that you do that is because you know that you can't prove your case beyond a reasonable doubt, and you're not going to require the defendant to spend a lot of money to defend a case you know you're going to lose anyway. That's what ethical prosecutors do. In addition to having the duty to do justice, you have a duty to be diligent to the case. And by that I mean you have a duty to spend the time necessary with the case to get up to speed, to understand the case, to know what parts of it are defensible, and to know what parts of it are most likely to lead to a just result, which in most cases, for most prosecutors, is a conviction. Because you don't get to that point unless somebody has done something bad and somebody's been hurt and somebody needs to pay a penalty for that. The reason I point this out is because people don't think about what the emotional toll is on prosecutors. Now, I have not prosecuted a case, but I have good friends who have prosecuted cases and from whom I have learned a great deal over the course of the years. A lot of times, prosecutors don't get any trial training. Somebody just throws them into court on a misdemeanor case and lets them figure out if they can prosecute it or not. And as a result, a lot of people develop very effective ways of working up a case based on having to do almost all of the legwork themselves. It isn't until you get into the more serious cases like murder, where you have teams of prosecutors assigned to one case, where you have 3 or 4 people working on it, and there's a division of labor. Usually it's one prosecutor, and sometimes it's one prosecutor versus, 3 or 4 defense lawyers. But whatever it is lawyer who is doing the work, the lawyer who is prosecuting the case, has to come up to speed on it. And particularly in some of the more grisly things that we have seen recently, thinking about the Melody Ferris case and the Chloe Driver case, the Sarah Boone case, the hot car baby cases, the baby cases in the hot car, the cases involving gunshot wounds, and the YSL case, which involved a number of pretty heinous acts. All of those things are going to be tried by prosecutors. All of those prosecutors, in order to try those cases, are going to have to produce an evidentiary record for the jury. Here's the critical thing. The jury is not going to be picked until the attorneys walk into the courtroom and pick that jury. So you don't know as a prosecutor whether you have 2 former nuns and a retired priest on the jury who may have weak stomachs and may not be able to take the graphic evidence, or you may have 4 or 5 ex-Marines on there who wouldn't have a problem with it at all. As a result of that, you have to be very judicious about the kinds of exhibits that you're going to put up and package for these jurors. One of the things you may notice in a criminal case is that the exhibits jump around in number. They'll go from State's Exhibit 14 to State's Exhibit 270 to State's Exhibit 11, back to State's Exhibit 23. And the reason they do that is because somebody's job is to catalog all of the evidence in the case. Usually it's a paralegal. And they start with Exhibit 1 and they end wherever they end up. So they start with these exhibits and they lay them all out, and now some lawyer, usually the head prosecutor or the prosecutor assigned to a specific witness has to determine which of the photographs they are going to use with their witnesses on the stand. And a lot of times they'll work with the police officers and the detectives to figure out which evidence may be best. They have to be careful because if they present too graphic of a case, they can turn off the jurors. If they don't present a graphic enough case, they might wind up generating sympathy for the defendant. And in addition to that, if they go too far overboard on the presentation of evidence, then the court can reel them back in and say, no, you don't need 76 different photographs of a dead body. You only need 4 or 5 because this should not be a freak show or a horror show. Now imagine you are a prosecutor, for example, in this driver case, and you have to look at the crime scene photographs of the child that was killed, and you have to look at the autopsy photographs of the child that was killed. You have to talk in depth with the medical examiner. There are so many things that you have to do that involve looking at all of this evidence in a way to understand it and be ready to defend it. For example, if you get a crime scene photograph and you're taking it from the east to the west, and that's the view that the camera sees, you have to look at that and you have to decide if all of that evidence is favorable to you. And if it is favorable to you, then fine. And if there's something in that photograph that might wind up generating sympathy for the defendant, you have to know that and be able to meet it. You have to do that with all of the different views because everything, every piece of evidence that you gather is in most cases going to be turned over to the defendant if it is even remotely possible that it might be exculpatory, because nobody wants to take a chance on getting a case thrown out like Alec Baldwin's was thrown out because you don't turn over evidence that could potentially be exculpatory. That may be unfortunate, but that is the rule of law in the United States, and I think it's a good rule. It's a good rule because it keeps prosecutors honest. Not that prosecutors need a lot of help in that regard. Most of them are honest and ethical. The emotional toll comes in a number of ways. You have to look at all those photographs, and it is nearly impossible to look at that and not be changed by it. I'll give you a good example, a personal example from my background. I am not a big fan of heights. You know, I stand up on a stepladder and get a nosebleed. I don't like to go very high when I'm painting the house or when I'm power washing the house. I'll go up a couple of rungs on the ladder, but when I get up over a 4 or 5, I mean, I'm at the age where if I break a hip, I'm in a nursing home, right? So I don't want to do that. So I'm real cautious about heights. The other day, one of the videos that I was watching on YouTube involved some of the silliest ways that people have died, and the thing was talking about selfies that people had taken from high places, and there are photos of people holding up their camera, and behind them is a 700-foot drop down a radio tower. Okay, if you climbed all the way up there to take that selfie, God bless you. I'm glad you did. But when I see that, I have a visceral reaction. And it's a physiologic one. I mean, an adrenaline dump when I see something like that. So I know when these prosecutors are looking at a lot of this stuff, they are seeing, they're seeing their own child. They're seeing maybe their niece or their nephew if they don't have children. I remember as a respiratory therapist, I was called to the emergency room for a battered child. This child was only, I think about 18 weeks old. The boyfriend, because it's never the father, it's always the boyfriend. The boyfriend had been frustrated because the baby wouldn't stop crying, so he got up and squeezed the baby's head until it stopped. Well, a baby's head is not meant for that kind of abuse, and the child was severely injured as a result. I can remember seeing the x-rays and looking at that child and just being filled with revulsion. In case you have some doubt as to exactly how graphic these images are and what kind of an impact they can have on people, I submit to you this next little clip, which is from the trial in the Melody Hoffman murder. And what happens here is fairly interesting. The medical examiner is going through some autopsy photographs and autopsy videos with the prosecutor, and you have a juror collapse.
As part of this investigation, were you asked to compare some potential weapons to the injuries that you observed during autopsy to form an opinion as to whether or not those specific weapons were consistent with the injuries you saw?
Yes.
And how did you observe the weapons?
Through photographs.
Regarding specifically, well, were you asked to look at a specific knife?
Yes.
Were you asked to look at minimum, the handle to a machete?
Yes.
Regarding the knife and the machete, did you also, as part of forming an opinion, review 2 short video clips that overlaid weapons over injuries on Melody Hoffman's body?
Yes.
And when you were viewing those video clips, did you use the rulers associated with the original photos of the weapons to the rulers that were used in your photos at the time of autopsy to make sure that the scale during the comparison was correct?
In my opinion, it appeared as though the scale seemed appropriate.
Did you find that viewing those clips helped you form an opinion as to whether or not the weapons you were asked to consider were He's not responding. That's
Now, this is just one juror, but you can see, obviously, these images are pretty powerful. And that's another reason why judges are reticent to have really ghastly images shown to the jury, because not only can they cause people to really hate the defendant, they can also, in some cases, cause them to really hate the prosecutors. And I thought about my own children, and it was truly one of those situations where I realized that people need a lot of work on anger management, particularly if it's a boyfriend-girlfriend situation and not a husband and wife nuclear family situation. I was impacted by that. I can only imagine what a prosecutor who does this routinely has to go through in order to present a case to a jury. And of course, as I said before, it's a fine line. Do you present too much, you turn the jury off, they stop listening. If you go too light, then maybe the defendant skates or gets a reduced charge. So finally, what I wanted to do was sum up with this. I think we owe our prosecutors a debt of gratitude, because they have to look at a lot more, even that gets featured on Court TV or Law and Crime or any of these other channels. They have to look at a lot of stuff, and they have to cull it down to what they present to the jury. And I think there must be an emotional toll on them. And they should be respected, they should be appreciated for the work that they do. Now, I've been hard on prosecutors when I thought that I needed to be. I have been complimentary when I thought they've done a good job. And I'm not going to stop doing that. But I am going to tell you that all of them deserve your appreciation for what they have to go through in order to do their job. Because again, I think that's lost on the media. I think the media pays absolutely no attention to what that job is. They just look at the one loss record and make a determination and tell you what that is. That, it isn't a binary thing. It isn't win or lose. It's the search for justice is an important part of our entire justice system. It begins with the prosecutor, it ends with the jury verdict, and of course the defense plays a big role in that as well. And I would also point out that, for the most part, the defense attorneys have to look at the same thing, and they might wind up being revulsed too. They have an option of taking a case or not taking a case unless they're a public defender. And if they're a public defender, they're kind of saddled with what they're given. To the prosecutors, they don't have a choice. They have to speak for the victim, and that's a pretty big burden to carry. So that's what I have for you today. Thank you for being here. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments down below. You can email me at the address above. Like, share, subscribe, all that stuff. If you have the opportunity today, do a kindness, a simple kindness for someone. Take somebody lunch, open the door for them, let somebody, as you're walking to your car and everybody's looking for parking spaces and the shopping mess that is sure to come, point out, hey, I'm parked up there if you want my slot. There are a lot of things we can do to make other people's lives better, and eventually it makes all of our lives better. After you've done something nice for somebody, come on back down here to the beach and talk to me tomorrow. I shouldn't have to say this, but you don't seek legal advice from a guy down at the beach. You seek it from a lawyer in a lawyer's office, where there are people running around in suits and secretaries and all kinds of other people. I'm just a YouTuber. I'm a retired attorney at this point, and although I retain my license to practice in the state of Missouri, I am not here dispensing legal advice. I'm just offering general content on the law. And here are some videos that YouTube thinks you may enjoy.